Truth time, y'all. The video I just recorded is insanely dry, and it's informative, so I'm going to go ahead and post it. But this is going to be the technical video. I'm already scripting a more entertaining one that will hopefully be a bit more attractive to general audiences. But if you're a DM and you want to know how the dice work, I make a pretty comprehensive video here. It's long, but it's going to have everything you want to know about the Genesys Dice system in it, as well as some good advice. So, if dry and technical is what you're looking for, I'm putting this out for you. Also because I haven't put a video out in a while, and this gets me a little more time to work on the script. So, I hope you find the video useful. I'm not going to hope that you find it entertaining because I don't know how you're going to do that, but hopefully you find use. All right, what we're going to do now is some examples and explanations of the dice system in Genesys. I'm going to be using my own dice collection, which is strictly the Star Wars Fantasy Flight dice, but they are just as usable in the Genesys system. They've just changed some of the trademark symbols. Some of the basic dice you're going to find are this light blue dice, known as the Boost dice. There are no negative symbols on the Boost dice. It's one of the positive dice. There's also this one, the black dice, known as a setback dice. There are no positive symbols on the setback dice. Something you should note, taking a quick look at these dice, there is only one of each symbol on any face of the setback die, whereas the Boost dice has some with double faces. The Boost dice is inherently stronger than the setback dice because it's in the player's favor. This is because the Fantasy Flight Genesys system is all about making a good narrative, and it believes in the power of the player. This green dice is called an ability dice. It's inherently stronger than the Boost dice. It is one of the base dice for figuring out rolls. This is another player dice and a positive dice, so therefore there are no negative symbols on the ability dice. The counterpart to the ability dice is the difficulty dice. As with the setback dice, as compared to the Boost dice, these are inherently slightly less tilted against the player. However, it is a lot more powerful than a setback dice. The difficulty dice is a negative dice and has no positive symbols, and is one of the base dice for figuring out difficulty on a check. The next dice are the upgraded dice. This is called a proficiency dice. A proficiency dice is the most potent of the positive dice. It has no negative symbols, and it's the only positive dice that has a triumph on it. This isn't going to be the symbol you're going to be familiar with in the Genesys system, but it is a unique symbol only found on the proficiency dice in either system. The counterpart to the proficiency dice is the challenge dice. The challenge dice, similar to the proficiency dice, is the only negative dice that has a despair symbol on it. It's inherently more powerful than either the setback or the difficulty dice. It is a negative dice with no positive symbols. Okay, so you're obviously going to be asking yourself, how does the narrative dice system work? Why is it different from a D20 system? The answer is these dice are more interested with creating good narrative moments than statistical yes-no results. Just to grab a handful of dice here and give an example. Say I'm rolling this on a check. You read a roll by first going through and adding up the symbols. Blank. Oh wow, look at that. Lucky me. Each symbol has a value. In the Genesys system, when you add your dice up, like counterpart symbols cancel out, with the exception of triumph and despair, which means in this dice pool, a failure and an advantage are taken away. And what we are left with is 2 advantages, 1 success. However, if you roll a triumph, that counts as an additional success. You're technically rolling a success and the triumph symbol. Likewise, if you roll a despair, despair counts as an additional failure, which means you're technically rolling a despair symbol and a failure. Now all we're left with is our 1 success, triumph, 2 advantages, and our despair. So if we were going to decide the result of a roll, let's just say, for example, let's say that we're trying to open a door. With a success, the door opens. That's assumed. If you get net successes on the thing you were trying to do, you succeed. You can't succeed if you have no failures. You have to have a positive result. That means you have to have at least one success. Additional advantages mean that the result is even better. So with 2 advantages, you might be able to say something like you gain some insight into the complex's electronics or locking mechanism, so the next time you make a check to unlock a door, you have an additional boost dice. Or, less mechanically, you could say that the door is held open for a certain amount of time, which gives your teammates an advantage or a narrative edge in proceeding. This triumph means something greater than a natural success occurs, which could mean something along the lines of, say, for example, you are being pursued as you try to unlock the door and escape. You could say that with this triumph, the door closes and locks behind you. Something to always remember about the system, though, is that triumphs do not cancel out despairs, which means, yes, you opened the door. Yes, your teammates are able to make it through as well. And yes, the door will close and lock behind you. However, with this despair, the GM could declare a door opens further down the hallway, and the general is revealed to be approaching you with a new squad of riflemen. Then, whoever's turn is next will go ahead and pick up their dice and try to advance the scene, making their narrative check. It's worth noting, in Genesys and the narrative dice system, initiative is handled on a sort of, we'll call it a polite rotation. What happens is every one of the party members rolls for initiative and every one of the NPC groups rolls for initiative. And rather than having any specific name on an initiative order, what you've done is effectively bought party initiative spaces and enemy initiative spaces. To use these tokens for now, say for example that you have 4 party members and 2 groups of NPCs. Say you roll up initiative and you total up the results and the initiative looks something like this. In the initiative system in Genesys, this means that any party member can choose to take that first initiative slot, any NPC can choose to take the NPC slot, and then the rest fall into place as the initiative progresses. Whoever goes first can be decided by merit, by simply taking it, or by council vote. It's really just up to the party playing. But all this means is that whoever the party wants to go first can go first. It doesn't mean they have to roll first. If it makes narrative sense for the Indiana Jones character to snatch the idol before the boulder starts rolling, then let Indiana Jones go first instead of last, maybe. Or if you don't want the boulder rolling until the end of the initiative, then definitely put Indy down here at the end with his bag of sand. So I've showed you a general role with the Genesys system, but then the question still remains, how do you figure out what dice you use on a check? And that comes down to checking the character sheet and the difficulty that the storyteller gives you when you decide to take an action. Say, for example, that door situation. Forget the dice I used before, let's just make a new roll. This is a different door, maybe an easier door. All checks start at a certain difficulty. They're simple, which means that you don't add any purple dice to the check. Generally, this is written off as a task that doesn't require a check, but sometimes talents can reduce a check down to no purple dice, and you would still make a check. Or if you want to know how well a character does on a check without difficulty dice, you could still make them roll their positive dice to see how well they roll. You could still also have setback dice on the check, you just don't have any difficulty. Then there's easy. Easy is 1 difficulty dice. Average is 2 difficulty dice. Hard is 3 difficulty dice. Daunting is 4. Formidable is 5. There's also technically an impossible task. Generally, this means that the check is unable to be met. Say something should raise difficulty past 5 difficulty, or you cannot reduce the difficulty of the task down to 5. The rule of thumb is to not let the player try to make that check in that case. However, if a player has a way to knock down the difficulty of any check, perhaps making an impossible task possible, impossible does technically start at 6. You're going to hear me talk a lot about ways of reducing difficulty or removing boost dice and setback dice. Those all have to do with talents, which we'll get to later. Please put that out of mind. I'm just covering my bases for people in the comments. Now, back to that door example. This is a much more average door than we're probably looking at literally a difficulty of average. So this is where the dice check starts. To continue the example, the storyteller would probably say that this is an average skullduggery check. Next, you would check your character sheet and check out what their skullduggery skill is. If you check the character sheet in the back of the core rulebook for Genesys, you can see that skullduggery is a skill that uses cun, or cunning, as its attribute. This means that when you check out your character sheet, you need to figure out 2 things. 1, your attribute related to that skill. 2, your ranks in that skill. For this example, we'll say the character is decent at what they do, and they have 3 ranks in the skullduggery skill, and an average attribute score of 2. What do these numbers mean? The example they give in the book is you first ask yourself, which of my skill rank or my attribute score is higher? In this case, it would be the skullduggery ranks, because there are 3 ranks in skullduggery. This means we go over to our dice pool and we pick up 3 ability dice. This is where it starts. The next thing we have to do is upgrade our dice pool a number of times equal to the other number. So in this example, we had 3 ranks in skullduggery, got us these green dice. We have 2 attribute score in cunning, which means that we are going to upgrade 2 of these dice from green to yellow. When you upgrade a dice, you don't just add it to the pool, you remove the previous dice and replace them with yellow. Upgrading is the process of taking the lesser of the dice and turning them into the improved version of the dice. It goes the other way too. If something mentions that you downgrade the dice, you go from this to this. The same thing can be done for the difficulty dice. Things may upgrade the difficulty of your checks. They're not just these purple difficulty dice. Something, for example, as simple as the DM saying that there is an additional deadlock on this door takes the process of unlocking it from this to this. Something important to note about the impact of one of these decisions here. Until this dice was upgraded, there was no threat of a despair on the table. Introducing a challenge dice into any roll implies that there is catastrophic risk in the action being taken. As a storyteller, you should not add a challenge dice to any situation that does not have catastrophic risk of failure. For example, I could say that there is the catastrophic risk of the thief trying to open this door and having it slam down on his hand and losing a limb, or being shocked so bad by the automated defense system that he gets knocked unconscious, or any other terrible things if I really want to include that. But this is an average door, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep it average because there's plenty of other checks in this game that I could potentially upgrade. There are going to be plenty of other rolls that would happen tonight that make a lot more sense of being catastrophic than picking an average door. Okay, so we got this far. We have the base for the player figured out, and we have the base difficulty figured out. Once you get this far, you have to start asking a few questions. 1, do you have any tools for the job that would help you out? If the thief has lockpicks, for example, that would probably give him some assistance in this check. In the Genesys system, this is represented by the boost dice. A boost dice represents any sort of advantage in the situation that would benefit the players. When you add boost dice to this scene, consider the size of the impact that that element is going to have on the situation. Do they have just a simple lockpick? Do they have some sort of advanced tool set or automated system that would assist them? In a lot of cases, thieves have talents that aid to their ability to perform this action, and that would take the form of a boost dice. Likewise, you would do the same thing for the difficulty side. Are there any elements in the situation that would be of a hindrance to the players and add to the difficulty? The Genesys system, that takes the form of a setback dice. When you add setback dice to the scene, you also need to ask yourself about the magnitude of the impact that that hindrance is going to have on the players. Is it something as simple as the lock is rusty? Because that might just be 1 setback dice. Is there something more advanced, like a hacker is on site and has installed software to intentionally make these doors more difficult to crack? That's probably another setback dice. Another important note about this narrative dice system is when it comes to adding boost dice and setback dice, consider and add them separately. There are many things in the system that can help reduce the number of setback dice and boost dice in a situation. Something to remember with the narrative dice system is that when you add your boost dice and your setback dice, consider their numbers separately and don't think about canceling them out if there's a great number of either of them. There are things built into the narrative dice system that remove setback dice and boost dice accordingly. It's an easy mistake for an inexperienced storyteller to make to start removing setback dice before the players have a chance to touch the dice pool, because it undermines player power. Think about it like this. A player has spent experience to gain the ability to remove setback dice from their dice pool. If you do it for them and they don't have any setback dice to remove, that feels like wasted experience and not very validating for the player who thought they were very smart for picking up that talent in the first place. Let players have the opportunity to make an impact on their own gameplay. Okay, so we have this dice pool together here, and this is just for unlocking an average door with a hacker on site who's installed software to prevent doors from being unlocked by a fairly skilled lockpicker who has an advanced set of lock picking tools and a talent in this exact situation. So what we would do from here is roll. You can group them by symbol, which makes a lot of sense, or you can do your best to simply cancel out dice as they get paired up. In this case, we don't have another threat to remove an advantage and remove this dice. However, if you will note, we have one failure and one success, which means we have net nothing. This is not a successful check. However, we have 3 advantages. In this situation, it means we have unsuccessfully attempted to crack this door. But with 3 advantages, we could leverage this situation into something salvageable. Let's say, for example, the thief was unable to pick the lock on the door, but with 3 advantages, he can say that he did find a backdoor route into the camera system, and from that port on the door is able to look through the cameras in the next corridor. This is an example of the narrative dice system at work. A player was unable to do the thing he set out to do, but thanks to advantages, he still gets something cool out of the situation, and it's flavored and described in a way that's narratively interesting rather than yes or no, and it avoids making that poor player impotently pick up his d20 and wait for his next turn in initiative. Another important tool in the narrative dice system is story points. You remember these guys from when we did initiative? These are the Star Wars tokens they gave you to represent something called destiny points. In the Genesys system, they're simply called story points, and they do them a little bit differently. At the beginning of the game, when you sit down, the game says to make 2 piles of tokens. One pile is for the players. It's called the player pile. This pile has a point for every party member present at the table. It also says to make a storyteller pile. There's only one storyteller. Say we take our door check from earlier. The player thinks that there's something significant and narratively important on the other side of that door, and thinks that fate will lead them through this doorway. The thief could then spend one of these story points, moving it from the player pile into the storyteller pile, and then upgrading their dice into another proficiency dice. However, it should be noted that should the players pass on that opportunity and instead the storyteller takes advantage of their story point, they could upgrade one of the difficulty dice into a challenge dice. The rule for this is that players usually get first say on if they use a story point or not. There's going to be plenty of checks and plenty of points flipping back and forth. So for this example, let's just say that the players decided they wanted to use it and they rolled that dice pool. Now you have 3 points sitting in the player pool and 2 points sitting in the storyteller pool. You obviously don't need these specific tokens to represent the story point pool. You can use all sorts of other accessories, like fun little metal coins you picked up at your friendly local game store. Shit doesn't even need to match. You get 4 player points, 1 storyteller point. The only thing that's really important is you have some way of marking which pool is which so you don't get confused later on. That was the video. I tried to warn you, and I'm sorry. This is buffer space because there's not really a gag reel. Yep.